So welcome everyone to our January garden chat. Tonight we're going to have a presentation on Seed College, deeply rooted in native seed propagation. This is the time of year where a lot of folks are interested in native seed propagation. If you have any questions, please hold them until the end of the presentation. Tonight's presentation is going to be given by me, Marlene Smith. I'm the president of Wild Ones Chesapeake Bay. And also with me here tonight for the presentation is Lynn Wheeler. She's our membership chair. For those of you who are not Wild Ones members or maybe new to Wild Ones, we just want to go over with you quickly that Wild Ones is a national nonprofit that promotes the use of native plants through local and national educational programs. We currently have 129 chapters in 36 states. And if you're not a member and are interested in joining, you can go online to join a chapter near you. There are currently 5 chapters in Maryland. Chesapeake Bay covers the southern Maryland area, Delmarva, the eastern shore. There's Greater Baltimore, Frederick out in western Maryland, and the nation's capital region. And our chapter currently has 74 members, which includes 3 businesses and 1 nonprofit. And welcome to anyone who's new to our chapter since our last meeting. So tonight we're going to talk about why propagate native plants from seeds, what's in a seed. It all starts with viable seeds, what seeds need to germinate, we'll talk about breaking dormancy, talk about general supplies for all types of seed starting, the general procedure. We've broken our presentation into 4 levels, and then we'll give you some additional information and some resources. And Lynn, I think this is you.
Okay. Yes. Why propagate native plants from seeds? Native plants are adapted to our environment. They provide native habitat for insects, birds, other wildlife, and as many know, host plant for a lot of our larval stage of insects. They connect us with history and local cultures. I'm going to add a little bit to this, Marlene. I thought it would be interesting. Many of us know the native plant jewelweed. Well, the crushed leaves and the sap from the stems are a well-known folk remedy for skin irritations, for poison ivy and stinging nettles. And a component in the leaves has histamine and anti-inflammatory activity. And the cardinal flower alludes to the bright red robes worn by Roman Catholic cardinals. Anyway, I got a bunch of all that stuff, but I'll leave it alone for now. You get the gist. Native plants preserve our local ecotype genetic diversity, provide access to hard-to-find plant species. Propagating also gives us educational. You learn about the full life cycle from seed to seed. It's easy. Anyone can do it. It's economical, budget-friendly, a way to get new plants. It's a fun hobby, therapeutic, potentially addicting. I'll attribute to that one. And supports the Wild Ones vision of native plants and natural landscapes thriving in every community. And so we must talk a little bit about what's in a seed. Seeds are living things. Inside every seed is an embryonic plant and a starchy food supply, everything needed to make a new plant. However, they are living in a dormant resting state, which means that they require very little resources to stay alive until the ideal conditions for their growth occur. The first leaves are called cotyledons and don't usually look anything like the true leaves that come later. Most plants are dicots and have 2 seed leaves. The true leaves allow the plant to breathe, taking in carbon dioxide and sending out oxygen. Botany class is over. Okay, it all starts with viable seeds. perennials, biennials, annuals, grasses, vines, trees, and shrubs. Our focus today, dry seeds that bloom in summer and autumn. Dry before storing, can be stored with dry chaff. Avoid moisture, air, light, warmth. Avoid rapid or frequent changes in temperature or humidity. Best conditions for storage are cool, dark, dry location. Short-term storage, use a paper envelope. Long-term storage, use an airtight container such as glass jars, plastic jars, zipper plastic bags. Protect against bugs and rodents. Seed viability does decrease over time. And you'll notice that we have the QR code. You can check out our deeply rooted native seed collecting presentation also. Breaking dormancy, to stratify or not to stratify? That is the question. Many, but not all, native plant seeds need to go through winter weather before they will germinate. This process is called cold moist stratification, or sometimes referred to as pre-treatment, or even just stratification. You can simulate CMS native seeds by placing them in a slightly moistened medium in the fridge. The species and seed type dictates how long you will need to refrigerate. CMS may increase germination even of those that don't need CMS. What seeds need to germinate? Water. Without water, seeds will remain dormant. The amount of water is critical. Too much causes seeds to rot, and too little causes embryos to die. Oxygen. Seeds consume oxygen and release carbon dioxide. Seed starting media needs to drain well enough to meet this need for oxygen. Temperature. Temperature affects the number of seeds that germinate as well as how fast the seeds germinate. Light. Some seeds require light to germinate while others require darkness. Some seeds have no preference at all. Let's get started. Gather supplies. This is still me, right, Marlene?
Yes.
Okay, the supplies, of course, seeds, containers, depending on the method that you're going to be using, which we'll get into, the growing medium, soilless seed starting mix or potting mix, bucket or tray for mixing soil, water for mixing soil and misting, spraying, sprinkling seeds, a trowel, plant labels, markers, waterproof or UV resistant. Okay. Containers, flats, plug trays, germination trays, quart pots, milk jugs, homemade option like a wooden flat. You'll see there in the back, that's the plug trays, which I'll be getting into on level 200, or am I 300? Whatever. The greenhouse level. So, but many options for containers. This is not a real tough requirement. Growing medium, seed starting mix versus potting mix. This is always a big debate, because in general, native seed is pretty forgiving, but this is what we find that works the best and most fine. Use a seed starting mix. A soilless, sterile, lightweight, and it's free from weed seeds, with a texture and porosity especially suited to germinating seeds. Typically, it contains some peat, perlite, wetting agent, and a starter fertilizer. You could also do potting mix, potting soil, may contain organic material, compost, sometimes soil. Typically has a coarser texture, often containing larger pieces of organic material like bark or stick. And some of this actually even comes into play depending on what you're propagating. Some native plants, kind of may want a little bit more of that organic material, whereas others not so. Avoid mixes that say weed free. They may contain germination inhibitors. Mixes with moisture retention crystals. Proper moisture of growing mix is important. Too wet and the seeds can rot. Too dry and they won't germinate. Garden soil it's too dense and may contain weed seeds. General procedure. Go ahead and prepare your containers and labels. Prepare your growing mix. Fill your containers. Sow your seeds. Plant only one type of seed per container. You wouldn't want to have that competition in one little container of multiple species. For most native seeds, sprinkle on top of the mixture and press into the mixture. Many need light to germinate. Do not cover with soil. Tiny seeds, optional to mix with an inert material, like a grow mix or coarse builder's sand or vermiculite to help with even distribution. Larger seeds typically plant the depth of the seed. Water seeds thoroughly into the growing mix, place an appropriate location, and wait. What we'll call level 100 is just direct sowing outside in the winter. That will provide natural stratification. Sowing into snow makes it easier to see where you spread seeds, so you get a nice even distribution of your mix. Broadcast seeds right on top of the snow, but the key is to sow on the right kind of snow. Fluffy, damp, packable snow. This way the seed will slightly sink into the snow. Avoid sowing seed on top of icy, crusty snow, or it'll blow around easily in the wind. Back to Marlene.
Thank you, Lynn. So I'm going to talk about level 200, and there are two methods here. One I'm going to refer to as seed sitting, and the other is I'm going to refer to as winter sowing. And basically, both of these are simply sowing seeds outside in the middle of winter to provide the cold, moist stratification naturally. Sowing in containers will protect the seeds from being washed away or eaten by wildlife. It reduces competition from weeds, produces strong, healthy plants. There's no hardening off period like when you grow seeds inside. Outside, it reduces the need for watering because Mother Nature will water them naturally with rains and snow. And the seeds will sprout when Mother Nature determines the conditions are right. It's not an early germination method, though. And the photo on the left shows what I'm referring to as seed sitting. It's simply sowing in open containers that are covered with a wire mesh and left outside for Mother Nature to do her job. And on the right is winter sowing, and that's sowing in protective vented containers. So I'm going to take you through the method of winter sowing in protective vented containers and milk jugs. And basically, we can do this anytime during the winter, starting on the winter solstice. And you'll need a few additional supplies than the original list. You'll need something to create drainage holes and something to cut the jug, and you'll need tape. So the first step is to collect and wash your jugs and discard the caps. Any translucent or transparent container that can hold the growing mix and be covered to provide a protective vented environment can be used. We're going to go through the milk jug method just because that's something that's readily available to everybody and that provides the perfect environment for condensation to collect and roll back down to moisten the soil. You want to be sure to wash and rinse your containers to remove milk or other food residue if you're using other containers. And keep in mind that natives need a minimum of 3 to 4 inches of potting mix to allow root development. So you want something fairly tall. You're going to punch 4 to 6 drainage holes in the bottom using knife or scissors. And optionally, you can use a drill, a hot glue gun, or a soldering iron. Next, you'll cut the jug in half, leaving a hinge at the handle. And as I mentioned, remove and discard the cap if you haven't already done so. You want to label the outside with a weather-resistant marker, such as UV-resistant markers, grease pencils, or China markers, or some people use paint pens on the outside. We also recommend that you use a popsicle stick or plant marker inside the jug. And some winter sowers will label the bottom with a piece of duct tape and waterproof marker. The thing here is to remember that the UV rays will fade some of your markers if you don't use something that's UV resistant. Hence why some people will label the bottom. You want to pre-moisten your growing mix by adding warm water until the mix is thoroughly damp, not soaking wet. It'll hold together like a snowball. You want to add a water permeable barrier such as a coffee filter or landscape fabric or newspaper to the bottom of the jug before adding grow mix to keep the soil in and the slugs out. That's an optional step, but I found it necessary because I do have slugs in my yard. You want to add your 3 to 4 inches of mix to the container and tap the container or press lightly to settle the mix and remove large air pockets. Like Lynn mentioned, you want to plant only one type of seed in the jug. You want to scatter the seeds on top of the mix and gently press them in. For larger seeds, you can follow the directions on the packet for the depth, planting depth, but you can disregard any other instructions on a seed packet. And then you want to water the seeds thoroughly into the soil to ensure good seed to soil contact. And the two photos show the difference between like evenly spacing seeds in a milk jug versus scattering the seeds. Either is fine, personal preference. You want to tape the jug closed with painter's tape or duct tape. I've also used packing tape, freezer tape, masking tape, electrical tape. You want to use whatever you might have on hand. And then you want to set the containers outside where the rain and snow can enter the top. You can water throughout the season if necessary. But keep in mind the caps are off. Place them in a protective area that's safe from disturbance. You can keep them in shade or part sun. You don't want them placed under eaves, covers, or decks that prevent rain from entering the top. And never ever bring your jugs indoors. This method is totally designed to keep the containers outside the whole winter until they sprout. And this slide shows the difference of germination depending on where the containers are placed. This was an experiment I did with 2 containers of Joe Pie back in 2022. I planted the seeds on January 14th in both containers. On the left is a container that was placed in a sunny location against a south wall. It germinated within 1 month. So at the time of this photo in March, the seedlings were already a month old. Compared to the picture on the right, where I placed them at my shady steps, and that placement took the seeds 2 months to germinate. So at the time of this photo, all I had were the cotyledons. So basically, germination is dependent on microclimates in your yard. And you want to remember that this isn't really a plant and forget method. You want to check your jugs weekly. Seeds put down roots first, which is why we can't see progress. And it's the critical time not to allow seeds to dry out. If it's too dry, your jugs will feel light when lifted. The mixture will start to look crumbly and dry. It'll probably be lacking in condensation. And the solution would be to bottom water by placing your jug in a container of water or spray or mist water into the opening. Don't pour for fear of disturbing your seeds. And if the jugs get too wet, you might find that they're very heavy when lifted. The mixture will look waterlogged. There may even be green algae on the surfaces. The solution there is to add more drainage holes along the side near the bottom. Or if it's not below freezing, you might want to open the jug for a day or 2, let the contents dry out. After germination, again, keep your seedlings moist. If there are unexpected warm spells, You could open your containers and or move them to the shade. You don't want the new seedlings to fry in the heat. After opening, you want to water well and close the containers if you're expecting a freeze. Well-watered seedlings will fare better during a freeze. You want to wait for 1 to 2 sets of true leaves to appear or until seedlings are 2 inches tall before you transplant them. And then you want to pot up your seedlings when they're at least 2 inches tall and keep watered and enjoy your homegrown plants. And this is the picture from the previous slide where you can see the cotyledons are not ready to transplant. They're too tiny, but the ones that have 2 sets of leaves and or 2 inches tall, they're ready to be transplanted.
In our next segment of Seed College, we'll be demonstrating level 200 or winter sowing, and the demonstration will be performed by our chapter member, Esther Bonney. And here's Esther.
The supplies needed for winter sowing include seeds, seed starting or potting mix, well moistened, a milk jug, knife or scissors, labels, a weather-resistant marker, water, tape, an optional coffee filter, and optional sand. Using a knife, cut 4 to 6 drainage holes in the bottom of the jug, twisting the knife to open the drainage holes. Scissors, a drill, hot glue gun, or soldering iron are other options for making drainage holes. Next, cut around the jug 4 inches from the bottom using a knife or scissors, starting near the handle and going all the way around the jug, leaving the area under the handle intact. Add the optional coffee filter. Ensure the soil is moist and holds together like a snowball. Fill the jug with soil, tapping or pressing the soil gently to remove air pockets. Adding more soil is necessary to a depth of 3 to 4 inches. Add your label. And for tiny seeds, most need light to germinate, so you should simply sow them on top of the soil surface and not cover them. Or you can mix them with coarse sand to help distribute the seeds more evenly. Coarse sand is translucent and lets light through, helps maintain moisture, and keeps seeds in place when watering. Note the tiny seeds. Mix well with sand. And once mixed, sprinkle the seed sand mixture on top of the moist soil, pressing gently to ensure seed to soil contact. Water gently to moisten the seeds. Wipe any water off the jug's exterior and seal the jug with tape. Using a small piece opposite the handle to secure the lid in place makes taping around the rest of the jug easier. Next, Esther will demonstrate sowing large seeds. For larger seeds like milkweed, space the seeds evenly on top of the moist soil. Why do we start with moist soil? Because dry soil repels water, so seeds sown on top of dry soil may wash away when watering. Press the seeds into the soil to ensure seed to soil contact. You can cover the seeds with a small amount of dry soil, no thicker than the thickness of the seed, but it's optional. The freezing and thawing of the soil in the jug will work the seeds into the soil naturally. Water. Add your label. And seal the jug. Why do some winter sowers cover the seeds? The practice comes from outdoor sowing to keep the seeds moist and from flying away or floating away during heavy rains or winds, and to keep animals from eating them. But again, that's optional. Place the jugs outside where they are exposed to the winter weather and you have easy access to check on them. And that's it. Happy winter sowing. We wish you much success. Now it's back to you, Lynn.
Back to me. We're going to call this level 300. sowing inside in a greenhouse or hoop house. This does require artificial stratification, putting your seed in the refrigerator for 30 to 60 days, depending on the type of native plant. Also, you're adding optional supplies such as artificial lights, heat mats, timer, oscillating fan, kind of sharing this idea with everyone, because you could start even with like a 8x8 kit greenhouse for about $1,500 and or get as, much more larger facility. But it's a wish list that you might have. Next slide.
Hi, and welcome to Seed College Level 300. Welcome to letting me share something I've been doing for about 20 years now with propagating native plants. So now I'm lucky enough to even have what is about like a 12 by 20 greenhouse that my wonderful husband built. And so now I'm able to regulate and be able to provide all those things that really make seed germination at a high percent by being able to have heat, control the lighting, control the ventilation. So what I'm going to do now, though, is talk about how I've been handling native plants. And I go ahead and use a deep well. This is like a 5 by 10, multiple different suppliers that you can get these from. Mainly because what I'm doing here is I'll be basically making a plug. And your native plant will develop a really nice root bed in this, and you can store it in for a couple years without that worry and hazard or hurrying to get it into a pot or get it into the ground. And I also go ahead and always have it in a flat container for a lot of it, so that once I get a root ball developed, I can bottom soak water, and do little soaking methods there. So since this is different from your temporary seed propagation that you get in a milk jug, and the fact that you will possibly be storing your plant for even a couple years. I've even had them up for 3 years. I do something different as far as the soil. We go ahead and here we do compost. So I do a mix of compost plus I had probably about 4 years ago a load of wood chips delivered, which now have really gotten to a wonderful consistency to also use for my plant propagation. So what I have here is I have prepared most of my deep wells already with a mix of that compost and wood chips, kind of like a 50-50. And the reason that we're having to do this is because you would have long stores, so you are going to have some nutrients here, because they're not going into the ground real quickly. And that's the theory as to why I've been doing this, and I've had a lot of success with it, so I'm sticking with it, assuming this is the way to go. So most of these wells I have ready. I'm just going to demonstrate the last 3. I'm just putting about yay amount into the bottom, again, of this wood chip and compost mix. So that's that for that. Now, what I'll do is I'll be using a combination of that seed starting material that Marlene had shown you for the winter sowing jugs, not jugs. And I have a little bit too of these wood chips in here, but I would say about 70% of this is the seed starting material, and then I'll just be topping everything off. A lot of times I don't start till like the latter part of February because the greenhouse just provides so much of a boost. I don't want to have to be babying them that long. And these flats likely will only be in this greenhouse for about 5-6 weeks. And once I get a nice little, probably more than 2 leaves, 6, 8. Say the plant gets about yay big, how's that? Then I go ahead and put them outside. So now we got that. Let me move this back here. Get this out of the way. And we'll get to the seed. This is a seed that does not require, like say the cold moist stratification, which is the method that the winter sowing jugs are giving you, and which many seed require, but there's a good number that don't, like the bee balm, like your purple coneflower. A lot of the mint family doesn't require it. A lot of asters don't require it. So we can just kind of jump in and not have to worry about it. So I also like to use with this method, I have a little seed dispenser, and so I'll just go along and gently be able to dispense. If I get it on the right, there we go. So I would do a little quick mist on it. I'm gonna go ahead and top it there. And then what I have here in the greenhouse is we have heat mats. So they'll go on the heat mat, and then I also have lighting, and we'll talk a little bit, we'll have slides about lighting requirements, proper ventilation that a greenhouse can also is important. The biggest mistake I have ever had with this method would be once the plant has germinated and then someone would add the humidity tray back on and they would get burnt. So that would be, this is great, but you only use it in the very beginning until you really get that couple leaves, and then this will come off. And that would be Seed College 300. Thank you.
I guess you guys heard the quack quack. That was Bill Smith's phone. I thought that was a funny addition to that. So, and I hope you enjoyed that. I do a lot of vegetable plants and flowers and herbs, and that greenhouse really gets loaded for the season. But, native plants is a passion of many of us. And it's been fun to be able to do that with the greenhouse. You'll see in this slide the bottom right picture, and it shows that flat without the humidity tray on it, and the lighting. A lot of times you'll have that light bar even a little closer. A lot of the native plant websites will say 2 to 3 inches. I don't usually quite have it that low, as you'll see, but anyway, so providing the right intensity, duration, and spectrum of light is essential. Interior windows are not strong, will not grow strong seedlings, not enough light hours. Modern window coatings can inhibit growth. It's incorrect spectrum that's being provided. The results are weak and leggy seedlings. Fluorescent or LED shop lights are perfect for seed starting. And expensive grow light isn't required. Intensity or brightness is measured in lumens. Choose a shop light with a minimum of 2,000 lumens. Light reduces quickly as distance increases. Keep lights 2 to 3 inches, or like in my case, I probably do more like 10. Seedlings need 14 to 16 hours of light to grow. They also need 8 hours of darkness to rest. Next slide. Me or you, Marlene?
This is still you, Lynn.
Okay, thank you. Seedling care for inside sowing. Watering, of course. Wait until the top of your growing medium is nearly dry before watering. That's a biggie right there. Bottom water to prevent oversaturation. The goal is to keep the root system supplied with water and oxygen. If containers are too wet, damping off fungi can quickly kill seedlings. Ventilation, use a small fan to toughen up your seedlings and to keep the heat from getting too high. Fertilizing, if your seed starting mixture doesn't contain fertilizer, apply half-strength liquid fertilizer to seedlings once true leaves have formed. Fertilize weekly until hardening off your seedlings. Why didn't my seed germinate? Is it me, Marlene?
I can take it back, Lynn, if you want.
Yeah, go for it, honey.
Okay. So one of the biggest questions I get from people who try growing natives from seed always wonder, why didn't their seeds germinate when that happens? And you have to keep in mind that some seeds may have been immature when collected. They may have dried out or rotted. Maybe they didn't get enough cold, moist stratification. For example, if you're winter sowing something now that might have needed 90 days or more, I doubt that it's going to get that amount of cold, moist stratification this season. Some native seeds actually require what's known as double dormancy, where they have to go through cold, moist winter, followed by a warm, moist season, and then another cold, moist winter before they'll germinate. And the pictures on this slide actually give you some examples of plants that require double dormancy, many of which are spring ephemerals.
Also, I'm glad, Marlene, that you put bloodroot on there.
Mhm.
Another little factoid. The Native Americans used to use the latex to make war paint and to dye their fabrics. I'm done.
Okay. Lynn, we can put all your little factoids in a post presentation document when we're done. How's that? So basically, if I have anything that doesn't come up that first year, if space permits, I'll leave the containers in shade during the upcoming seasons because they may germinate next year. And then some seeds you'll want to pot up for greater survival or long-term holding. The seeds in the flat on the left-hand photo were sown in flats in a hoop house at the Bee Lab this past year and transplanted into plug trays to grow. And then on the right, you'll see some native trees and shrubs that were sown in milk jugs and transplanted to 1-quart pots where they were allowed to live for a year before being planted into the ground. That just helps a little bit with their survival. And now that you have germination, what are the methods for transplanting? Well, if you've evenly spaced your seedlings, like on the left, it's pretty easy to pull them or cut them apart and plant individual plants. But if you have sprinkled them, like we've suggested for the tiny seeds, you can cut the seedlings apart like in brownie style hunks and plant them as hunks in your garden or in pots when you up pot them. And the theory behind that is that the strongest seedlings will survive. And one thing you want to keep in mind is to provide shade when you're transplanting, because transplanting disturbs the roots, which in turn affects the water absorption necessary for the plant's photosynthesis and cooling. You want to work in a cool, shady place to prevent the roots from drying out or getting too hot while you're working. And then once in the ground or in their new pots, you want to provide shade for the first 1 to 2 weeks after transplanting. And if the seedlings start to wilt in the sun, you want to keep them in the shade longer. A lot of times I will cover my transplants with even something as simple as a lawn chair to make sure they have some shade out in the garden. And this advice was taken from the Bonatera Seedling Division Guide, which you could access by scanning the QR code. So the last level we'll talk about is the commercial growers, level 400. And typically you'll find that they sow in a greenhouse, hoop house, or high tunnel using flats, plug trays, quartz, seedling trays, or other containers. They typically use artificial stratification in the refrigerator. It allows them flexibility to schedule their seed sowing around when they want their plants available. This is a picture of seeded quartz at the Bonatera nursery. Bonatera grows from local ecotype native seeds using a custom-made soil from decomposed wood chips, biochar, and sand. They do artificial stratification in vermiculite or some other inert medium. And you see they sow heavily in quart pots, and they transplant into plug trays to grow and sell their plants. And there are 2 QR codes here on this slide. One's for Jeremy's pot filling demo, and the other is for the Bonatera discussion with Jeremy Tidd that we had last year. And this is an example of another commercial grower, Wood Thrush Nurseries in Virginia. They usually start heating up their greenhouse in February for germination and growth in March. And expectations that they'll be dividing and potting in April for their plants to be ready to sell in May. And if you're interested in watching the process for Wood Thrush Nurseries, you can scan the QR code on this slide. And we'll make the slides available to everybody after today's presentation. But you have to remember that propagating plants is not enough. The goal of propagating should be sharing the plants to get more native plants in the ground. You can share with family and friends, swap with others, donate to your local native gardens at schools and community gardens, or even sell plants for nonprofit fundraising. And these are 2 of our events from this past year where we shared plants or seedlings. We'll provide some resources after the presentation. We have sources for checking the native status of plants, some of the seed sources that we're aware of in our region, and we'll supply information on greenhouse suppliers and more information on soil mixes. And with that, we'll open it up to questions. And I'd like to mention that the QR code on this slide will take you to a post-presentation survey, so that if you're interested in taking a survey to give us feedback on the presentation and tonight's meeting, by all means, scan the QR code and give us some feedback. So with that, I'm going to stop share, and I'll bring that QR code up again later if you're interested, but I'm going to stop share so we can take any questions.
Marlene, can you also, or can maybe Sue can put the link in the chat to the page you have that shows different propagation times for different seeds? I think you grouped them all by 30, 60, and 90 day. Do we have that on the website? Because that was a really handy.
Yeah, I
bit of
think I know what
information.
you're referring to. I don't think that's on the website. Yeah, I can't remember, Robin. There is a page on our website on winter sowing. I can't remember if that's on there, but it may be.
Okay.
So if somebody wants to try to go to Wild Ones Chesapeake Bay and find our winter sowing page and drop it in the chat, that would be great. But yeah, it might be on that page. I just can't remember off the top of my head what resources are on there.
Okay.
But I'll make sure that if it's not there, that I add it.
Otherwise, that information can often be found at places like Prairie Moon Seeds or Prairie Moon, and I think Ernst Seeds also talks about it on their site.
Yeah.
I usually
one thing
jump to Prairie Moon real quick for that info too.
Yeah, and one thing I'd mention is this we went through a little bit faster for the winter sowing just because of the sake of time tonight. But on our website on the winter sowing page is a more in-depth presentation on winter sowing that I invite everybody to go check out if you'd like more information.
Marlene, there were a couple of questions in the chat. Jesselyn asked if anybody had ever tried the soil blocking method of sowing. Jesselyn, you want to explain that a little more to us, please?
Yeah, sure. So soil blocking is essentially without using any really, I mean, I guess you could still use a plastic tray, but it's without using like the actual like cells of a plastic tray. So you just take all the soil and pack it, and they're really good. And usually people mostly have a tool that you press down into the soil, and it just separates it itself in like to little soil blocks. And you can make them as deep as you want, I believe, or as shallow. And I was wondering if anybody's practiced that with winter sowing it. I personally haven't practiced with it yet, but I plan to this coming season when it comes up for like the vegetable gardens and such. But winter sowing, I wonder if the freezing and thawing would make a difference in how well the blocks hold together. I just didn't know if anybody had tried that yet.
I haven't tried that, but that rings a bell that I know somebody who has, and I'll have to figure out who that is. I don't know off the top of my head, but I have heard of someone who did it, and they have a little tool that makes their blocks of soil. Yeah.
Definitely
I can't remember who that
experiment to
was
play
though.
with.
Yeah. Good question. There's more than one way to grow a seed, right?
Yeah, always.
And then there was a question on, probably mostly for Lynn, because she has the greenhouse. How do you keep mice out of the greenhouse and from making nests in your seeds?
I saw that pop up on chat, and I've never had a mouse. Mine's pretty well sealed. You know, I have a concrete floor, and there's probably, I don't have any gaps, you know, for the mice to get in, I guess. So I don't know what to tell her about. Sorry for the mice.
Bill said get a cat.
Exactly.
Well, I was going to say snake, but then I realized that the snakes aren't around this time of year, so that doesn't help.
Yeah.
But some people mention mint or peppermint oil sprayed around the outside, or pungent smelling, I forgot what the word was they used, strong smelling herbs within the space might be effective.
Interesting.
Anybody else out there have any experience? Feel free to unmute yourself and join the chat.
When I had my greenhouse, it was just about being in there very often, and moving things around very often would kind of deter them from wanting to be somewhere. Things that were like remain stagnant is when they kind of be like, okay, this place seems cool. We can come on over here. I even find them out in the garden. Sometimes I'll lift up one of those like seed trays, and it'll be like, good, and it'll like run away, and then you got the hawks watching and stuff. But yeah, just the herbs will help a little bit, and the peppermint oil spray can help. But yeah, being kind of a presence is probably a really good way to deter them.
Okay, and I have one more that Bill partially answered in the chat with a link. I get a lot of stuff with these little desiccant packages in it. Would they be helpful in keeping them with my envelopes of seeds? Or would
Yes.
they dry the seed way too much?
They're good for keeping your seeds dry.
Or they're good for keeping the seeds dry?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
I would wonder if it depends on like
something.
where. So I would say it depends on like what product you might have gotten it out of. Where'd you get them out of?
Oh, that's come in with stews. It comes in with some of my meds. It comes in with, got a package of socks the
It's
other
like
day that had one of.
Yeah, it's like a desiccant,
Desiccant.
but yeah, it's
Keeps exposed moisture.
Okay, because there are some you can actually get like moisture retaining packets as well that have like different levels of moisture and humidity ratings on them that are like specific for certain things.
Yeah, no, these just come in with, I support Amazon. I'll a lot of my packages come in with this stuff. And it doesn't seem to make any difference as to what the product is. Some of them,
Yeah, and I think you can actually also like just purchase those on their own, like silica packets as well. If you really, that wouldn't be a bad idea if you feel like you have a lot of moisture content happening.
Thank you all for the presentation.
You're welcome.
Very helpful.